This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
Welcome into the Sports Source Digital Network. I'm John Pennington, and I'm here to talk to you about the transfer portal, which means I brought someone else in as well. Ryan Callahan from GoVols247.com. He's our recruiting guru. You're a recruiting guy for them. You're a recruiting guru for all our Sports Source stuff. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're not going to get into a lot of the individuals because this is taped and people could add on. Tennessee could add some football players the next day or two. Tennessee basketball could add someone. They've already added one this week, but they could add somebody else. So we're not getting into the specifics. I want to talk big picture. And a lot of people were worried. Let me go ahead and stop to say, hit thumbs up, hit like. That helps us. Subscribe. That helps us. We appreciate you. A lot of people have been worried that Tennessee isn't making a lot of moves in the portal. We showed on Sunday's show that most SEC schools have added about 3 players. There are some, like Tennessee, who've added 1 or none. But for the most part, it's like 3 players. Most of those are not 4 stars. There's only 4 4-stars in the entire conference who've come in. It's a lot of 3 stars. Tennessee's inactivity has people wondering, A, do they just not care about the portal? Because you build through recruiting. Clearly, Hypel prefers that. But you usually sprinkle in some transfers. You're not doing a lot of sprinkling right now. Is that by choice? Or is that, hey, look, we're having to fill out a basketball roster too. Baseball is going to the World Series. Women's basketball is trying to build that. Is this a cash issue? Or is this just, we haven't found what we're looking for yet. We're finicky.
Yeah, it's a little bit more the latter. It's the spring portal is a weird deal. Everyone's looking for players at that point. Everyone still has needs, especially after your own players have gone to the portal. But you know what you're looking for is going to be mostly backups or players looking for a greater opportunity potentially in most cases. There are some guys who were starters at the previous school just looking for a big payday or a better program, better opportunity at a higher level. But for the most part, you're looking at guys that were not happy with their previous situation. So the limited quantity of good players makes it tough. And then what that does too is it increases the prices on what little quality is out there. So the NIL deals are pretty exorbitant on anyone who's a proven starter at another school. So you're coming through and you're looking for help. And Tennessee needs help in a few spots. They need another receiver. They need another defensive lineman. They're looking for defensive backs. As we record this, they're hosting a couple cornerbacks this week. So we'll see what they get. They've got a need at safety, obviously, after Jacoby Thomas left.
3 guys who've jumped in the portal that all play safety.
Yeah. So maybe the answer is you add a corner and move someone else to safety on the current roster. So we'll see how that all goes. But they've got needs. They just haven't found the right fit, and I don't think they're willing to just throw a lot of money at a lot of these problems. If the prices are through the roof, you got to be disciplined here, because I think people have to think of it in these terms. If you're an NFL team, you've got a budget, you got a payroll. Yeah. You're not hurting for cash. You might as well spend it in free agency, right? In this case, every bit of money you spend is the money you've got to go out and raise next year or whatever to replace it. So why throw bad money? And also, why cause a problem in your room potentially? What you're looking at in a lot of cases is you might be paying more for a backup in the transfer portal than you're paying a starter on your team right now, and then that potentially causes an internal issue.
Then other people say, well, then I'm going to the portal unless you pay me X. You saw that with the offensive line last year.
So it's tricky.
We were talking earlier today, and Syracuse had a receiver that came out and said they wanted $2 million. You told me there's another kid out there that's wanting 7 figures.
A guy that they expect to get 7 figures, a Georgia State receiver that put up good numbers last year, and at least our guys expected the market for him to get into the 7 figures. Because, again, there's no starting receivers out there. So I know Tennessee fans are kind of clamoring.
And what did he do at Georgia State last year?
Less than 1,000 yards. I mean, good numbers.
And that's $1 million.
Yeah.
So if you're Tennessee, you're sitting there going, yes, we'd like to have another receiver. But is it worth $1 million to bring in someone who had 700 to 800 yards at Georgia State against lesser competition?
And also, I mean, they're in a tricky position too, because they're trying to make a little bit of a switch to playing some youth at that position. So what are you trying to bring in? And they had a couple visits scheduled with wide receivers. One, a guy from BYU who had 300 receiving yards last year, but had made a name for himself as a kick returner. So a guy that realistically, ideally he'd be like a number 4 receiver for you.
Right.
But a guy like that on the market is getting a lot of offers, so he ends up getting some good opportunities. So he doesn't even make the visit to Tennessee. Another guy that was scheduled to visit canceled the visit and had some production at a lower level school, but didn't make it in because he's about the best of the market. He's the among the better guys available on the market. So how much are you willing to bend on a guy who realistically for you might be a number 4 or 5 receiver? And if there is a starter quality guy out there, are you willing to displace Braylon Staley or Mike Matthews or Chris Brazel at this point and shake up your room? It's an interesting dilemma. I don't know what the answer is, but they need another body of some sort at that position.
Not to mention, what year is that kid at Georgia State?
Now, I don't know. I think he's a junior, I want to say. So
let's say you got a couple years left.
Yeah.
It not only impacts your money outlay this year, it impacts it next year too. Because even if your guys this year say, oh, we're cool with it, whatever, we're not going to ask for more cash, what happens next year? Because everybody's going to know, oh, you paid that guy X?
Yeah.
Well, we want X.
Right.
Plus whatever.
Yep.
What a madhouse. It's just a crazy situation. I don't envy you. I'm not someone that likes chaos. I do not like chaos. I'm the guy who, if you threw a bunch of beans on the ground, I would have to neatly pick them all up because I just don't like chaos. Everything's OCD. Everything has to be hung straight behind us. So this system, it's just disorganized mess, and it changes yearly.
Yeah.
We were talking about this. Explain that, how, okay, initially you thought this, then it develops into this. Then it's like an organism that keeps growing, and you don't know where it's going to be next.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of explaining this to people a couple of years ago. Like, we don't know what the transfer portal is going to look like in 5 years because it was so new. And so when it first started, everyone thought it was going to be endorsement deals and all that. And it turns out it's mostly not that. There's some of that, but it's mostly these collectives,
just cash,
and just paying guys to go to a certain school. So you had the adjustment to that. Schools catch up, figure that out. Then you have schools kind of catching up and getting an influx of money as they catch up. So Tennessee, I think everyone had this perception based on the fast start they got off to a few years ago.
Yeah.
They're ahead of everyone. They've got a better NIL, more organized NIL collective than everybody else. So they're supposed to win all these recruiting battles. Well, then the money caught up. So other schools caught up, and now there's a lot of SEC programs and other programs and other conferences that have similar resources to Tennessee now, and so it's a more competitive landscape. So that changed. In this past cycle, I think you saw a change where the prizes in the portal went up because there was such a demand for experienced players. More people thought, you saw the Ole Misses of the world having some success with living in the portal, and everyone thought, I can get better return on my investment just going and getting a guy that started somewhere else, and I can tamper with him if I have to by going through his agent or his high school coach or something else and saying, hey, would he be interested? And I can get him in the portal, and that guy's worth a better return on my investment than going and paying a high school player half that to go sit on the bench for a couple of years.
Especially at quarterback. Yeah. Other places, I don't know that I would agree with that, but at quarterback, that's kind of my feeling. But people went in that direction. That's not necessarily the fix-all either.
So prices rose, and maybe that was also because there were good players in the portal. You saw all those quarterbacks, the Cam Wards, and those guys in the portal. So that had something to do with it too, just to respond to the quality of guys out there. And then this past offseason, what's happened is a lot of teams seem to have invested more in keeping the players on their roster out of the portal. And so that's led to, in the winter portal window, less quality available on the market, which then causes prices to rise on players who probably aren't as good. And throws the transfer value market kind of out of whack. And it makes it hard for schools like Tennessee that are maybe looking for rotational players and things like that to find quality in what they're looking for, as opposed to just bringing in a warm body just because you want more depth.
That's an interesting switch. I've never really thought about it. You look at the NFL, you got 32 teams.
Yeah.
Here, you're competing with 130. And you can say, well, how could Georgia State compete with Tennessee? Well, if Georgia State's got a small amount of budget, but they're just going after one guy, and that guy's going to start for Georgia State, but he's going to play a third of the time at Tennessee, that's a real competition suddenly between that, because you have 130 schools with 130 different values they put on these teams, whereas for the most part in the NFL, those 32 teams are all going to – one team isn't going to say, oh, he's a starter, and somebody else goes, he's not even making my bench.
An NFL starter is an NFL starter for the most part.
Exactly, yeah. So that is an interesting twist of it. We were talking earlier, and you said that you made the observation, just to sum this up, and I think it helps people remember it. It will me. But winter is where your starters move now. It's kind of developed to where winners,
except for Nico.
except for Nico. And then you get to the spring, and that's where your backups move.
That tends to be how it goes. And now, not always. Obviously, there's some exceptions. Jacoby Thomas just left Tennessee, so and as of this day,
and Tennessee's looking at bringing in the guy that he may displace at Miami, if that's where he goes.
Maybe
I've seen that. I've seen that talked about, that it could be another swap. In the same way that Nico and Aguilar were a swap.
Yeah, no visit scheduled yet.
Okay.
So we'll see if that one happens. But yeah, but the bottom line is very few of those types of guys are out there. And so Jacoby Thomas, people are wondering what kind of market is there for him. He didn't start at Tennessee last year. Miami and Florida State are scheduled to bring him in on visits. So, I mean, any guy like that's even in line for a starting job at an SEC school is going to have a lot of interest. So that's, Christian Charles, a guy that didn't play a ton at Tennessee, ends up at Virginia. So you're finding homes at Power 4 schools for these guys that were not big-time players because there's just not much out there.
What a madhouse. Let's talk collectives just for a second. In terms of, and I'm not talking Spire, I want to talk big picture. So I don't want people thinking we're throwing darts at Spire or anything like that. Just collectives in general. They all came out and tried to puff out their chests and act like, that's the deal. We're the biggest, we're the baddest. They all wanted to do that. Spire certainly did that, to the point that it kind of got UT on the radar of the NCAA, et cetera, and they were told to hush. But are these collectives now, how have they evolved? Are they, I just look at anything that, if any business that won't open its books, I look at them with a kind of a raised eyebrow.
Yeah.
What are we finding about the collectives? Is it smooth sailing all around the country, or is it a lot of double talk all around the country?
I don't know that there's been much. I mean, the thing that people have to remember is, collectives are doing the negotiating in a lot of cases, or all that.
And they're trying to involved in the fundraising.
Yeah,
as well.
Exactly. At the end of the day, they're working as an extension of the university that they're serving. So they're not it's not. I think some people had this idea in the beginning that Tennessee, that Spire's going out and finding players for Tennessee, and Josh Heupel just has to live with it. That's not how it works. There's clearly interactivity there, and they're doing what each collective is doing what that school wants it to. Now, there have been some issues that popped up. Florida had some well publicized issues, so there have been some things like that. But for the most part, I think the operations have become a little more professional as time's gone on, as they've figured out what they have to do, what they can do.
You're starting to see clauses in contracts that are kind of, if you leave,
and that's
you don't get to take the money with you.
That's been the next evolution. We see Arkansas, going after its money from Madden Iamaleava. We'll see if that starts a trend of that happening. I think some schools have had clauses like that in deals, but have been afraid to enforce them, wondering if there's a negative recruiting aspect of that. If we go after a player, is that going to be used against us?
Yeah.
So how this plays out for Arkansas will be watched very closely, I'm sure, by a lot of schools. But that's, I think people are trying to control, again, the chaos of the transfer portal and say, can we keep guys out of the portal by throwing in a clause like this? And so I think there'll be a lot of people watching that closely to see if they can recoup some of that money, because if they can, I'm sure a lot of people would love to go down that same path and take the same tactic in the future.
I wonder if you look at all these changes in sports and you hear people saying that there are more and more people saying, I don't like it, they're losing me. Here's my fear. Most of your big-time boosters, the real multi-millionaires, billionaires, they're not 30.
Yeah.
They're older cats. Who dislikes change the most? Older cats. Give yourself another 10 years when you're my age, you're going to hate change. And then throw another 10 years on that when you're 65, I'm going to hate change more. But those are the people that are least likely to like this system, I would think. And yet those are the ones you have to keep going back to every year and saying, we need more cash, we need more cash. It's not like, make your yearly donation, or we need you to help us build this building. It's literally coming back for, hey, we got this linebacker, we need you to cut another check to us.
Yeah.
Is there a fear in your mind of donor fatigue? Is there a fear of really losing people? I think TV ratings are always going to be great, because I think people on Saturdays are going to watch the games. I wonder about the actual school to fan relationship. I may watch it on TV, but I may not care enough to still get involved in this crazy. I don't know. You're going to spend my money on Nico Iamaleava. I saw how that worked. And you could say that about any school, because they all have hits and misses.
Yeah.
I just wonder, is that a concern, that donor fatigue, but also your older fat cats are the ones that probably less likely, in theory, to like this system. Or am I missing something that would make them like the system?
No, I think in the early stages, I would imagine, on one hand, they don't like probably that it's not tax deductible to donate to a collective. This is technically a for-profit business. That they're not written up the same as a
donation to a school,
as a donation to a publicly owned public university. So it's different, and you don't get the tax write-off, but you maybe have a little more control. If you're donating to get a new football complex or stadium improvements, you're hoping that'll impact recruiting. This is, hey, your money's going to go help us get a left tackle. That's a big difference. So there's maybe a sense in the early stages that, hey, I have more control. This is fun. I get to go contribute to the exact on-product field I'm going to see this fall. After a while, I think there's some real concern that donor fatigue sets in. And not just that, but now that the landscape has leveled out too, you worry people might feel that they're not making as much of a difference as they would like to with that money. I'm just helping my school keep up as opposed to making a difference, putting them above the rest of the field. So does frustration set in? On the other hand, we've seen LSU. They've gotten a pretty big investment this offseason as a result of some struggles on the field. So there's still a lot of motivation there to improve the product on the field because of on-field struggles. So I wonder about the long-term effects, especially if this revenue sharing discussion does not result in that actually going through. If that comes into play, that will provide some relief on the NIL front.
For a while.
And NIL won't go away.
Right, you'll still have that on top of it.
Yeah, it won't go away, but it will diminish the need for, the large numbers like we heard at Ohio State last year of each program having to provide that much money on top of revenue sharing.
Yeah.
So the schools would relieve some of that, but you would still need it. You wonder long term what that's going to look like, and if donors will keep giving to this, because it is, I'm sure, frustrating to them year after year to have to give money and not have it be tax deductible. And also, if they're asked to give money and they see that a guy like Nico goes and we spent all this money and we got one good year out of him, is that worth my money? I'm sure it's a challenge, and it will be more as time goes on.
Yeah, and another part of that is the motivation. You just kind of touched on that, but LSU was down, so people pull out their wallets. Ohio State just watched Michigan win a national title, and suddenly they buy a $20 million roster.
Yep.
My guess is, if we do the checking, their roster won't be as expensive this year. I may be wrong, but I'm guessing they went, all right, that's it. I've lived up there. I know if Michigan wins at something, the wallets are coming out. They will not take a backseat to Michigan, and vice versa.
Yep.
But I don't know. You just won it. Do you now throw more money at it again this year? You look at Texas Tech. Mm-hmm. Where they hadn't been doing anything in NIL, and then all of a sudden there's some oil money they've come into somehow, or there's some sort of cash because they're all over the NIL scene this year. Does that mean they're going to be there every year? So I think there are a lot of people who thought with Nico, Tennessee's going to do this every single year. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be your budget changes a little. I still think there has to be some impact. You are rebuilding an entire basketball roster. You spent big on Gillespie. You probably spent big on a mint.
Yeah.
You probably spent a mint on a mint. You can't tell me that doesn't impact the football roster. And at some point, because you're talking same donors, they've only got so much to give. It goes into one pool, and they could say, earmark this for basketball and this guy. I get that. But you can't go back to that guy and say, hey, we need you for the safety too. Can you? At some point, the cash isn't there every single year to where everybody's just throwing the maximum at it every single year. I think you're going to have peaks and valleys, and I think that's what we've seen, and I don't think fans expected that.
Well, I'll say this. From what I know, the money values involved, and this is kind of what I speculated early on. I think there was some concern, people thinking early on, like, I need to get a 3-year deal because this money may go away. It's brand new, and I can't trust it yet.
Yeah.
I was like, I think the money's only going to go up every year. And so far, that's kind of what we've seen. So I think the money's still going up overall that we're seeing throughout the sport. Because, again, as the Texas Techs and the SMUs of the world continue to get more involved, that just increases the need for the Miamis and the Tennessees and the Ohio States.
On the whole, yes.
Yeah.
I just don't know that one program every year is going to –
yeah,
we're 20 this year. We're going to be 21 next year. We're going to spend $22 million the next year, $23 million the next year.
It might not be that, but I don't know. We're less than 5 years into this still. I mean, the Nico deal was on the very front end of this, and that was in March 2022. So we're 3 years into this basically. So we don't know what this is going to look like, and that's kind of the lesson of each offseason being different. Is this thing is an evolving monster, If revenue sharing gets thrown in, it's gonna be a whole new iteration of this landscape. And there's still no guardrails on this really to speak of beyond what state legislation has been put into place. So it's not going away. I think that's the important thing to know. But I don't know. The money's not gone down to this point. Everyone keeps thinking there's a point where that'll happen, but if it's not with revenue sharing, I don't know what it'll be, because Tennessee loses Nico and you think, okay, they're going to save a bunch of money. They went out and spent roughly seven figures on a replacement for him that was getting tossed aside essentially at UCLA.
Yeah. Players from Appy State.
Yeah, and again,
to start with, before UCLA. So you're paying seven figures to a guy who was good enough for App State. Mm-hmm. UCLA decided he's not good enough for us. We'd rather have Nico.
Yep.
Okay, and then you're giving Merklinger a bump of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So all the money you were saving that you may be able to use on a wide receiver or something else, kind of disappearing.
And that's the important thing I think Tennessee fans need to know about this offseason. They've kind of been disenchanted with how the transfer portal's gone this offseason. And there's some things that they still could have done differently, maybe that would have gotten a receiver back in the winter or something like that. Yeah. But on the whole, I don't think they were ever going to be huge players in the portal this year, just in terms of numbers. They brought in a big signing class. That signing class cost a pretty good amount of money, and keep that in mind. And also, whatever money they did have to spend this offseason, some of that was spent on keeping players here. You had the Jermod McCoys of the world that had big seasons last year. You got
Ricky Gibson.
Well, obviously, that one was a publicly known deal. So you had to keep guys like that out of the portal. And then there were some behind the scenes people weren't even aware of that had to be taken care of. So a lot of that was spent internally and on your signing class, so that doesn't leave a bunch of money sitting around to go in the transfer portal if you're being smart about your money. And again, I think Tennessee's money has even gone up from last year. So that being said, even with that being the situation, you haven't had a bunch of money to go out and spend in the portal because you had to take care of your own guys internally.
We talked, I keep saying we talked earlier. Well, we did. But I also went and looked since we spoke. I just did a quick deep dive into teams that made the finals of the football playoffs the last couple of years, last 4 years. And I went all I had time to check was NCAA tournament. Did they make the NCAA tournament that year? Did they make the college NCAA baseball tournament that year? Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot that made them all.
Nope.
In Tennessee right now, football, basketball, baseball, softball, women's basketball. And those are all, they bring in different levels. Well, 2 bring in revenue.
Yeah.
3 don't. So you're just being benevolent. You're like, well, even if we just break even here, that's better than losing money. So there's value in spending on a national championship in something. You want school pride. You want to make it to the Sweet 16. You want to get back to Elite 8 in women's basketball, et cetera, Final Four. But there is the amount of return usually comes from football. Mm-hmm. So Tennessee is one of the rare schools that is having to fund, even if it's just we're going to spend $500,000 on this sport. Well, again, that's $500,000 that isn't going to football.
Yep.
That if you're a school that's all football, you don't have to worry about that. Yeah. You can put all your money toward football.
Yeah.
How big of an issue is that, in your opinion? When you look at Tennessee trying to be an all-everything school, which is great, but whenever people say, we got to get this outfielder, they got to spend on it, I'm sitting there thinking, fine, which receiver do you want to take off the football team?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I have a feeling that's the way it comes down. Again, you only have so many dollars to go and grab from the donors.
Yeah.
So
you have to earmark a certain budget for each sport. I'm sure that's how they kind of handle it. But yeah, football is obviously getting the lion's share, I think, of the money that's been raised. And it's money that you're taking away from the whole pie, but I'm sure there are some donors that are wanting to donate to specific sports too. Mm-hmm. So there's maybe some of that takes care of itself. Hard to say for sure how that's going to work out long term, but there's some trade-off there that if you want to be good at all sports, it comes at a price. You're not going to get that for free. If you're going to support Tony Vitello in baseball, a traditionally non-revenue sport, you are going to have to invest in that in a way that a lot of schools don't. So that's the trade-off. Now, it hasn't hurt, again, Tennessee's revenue that they're putting into the football side doesn't seem to be going down as a result of it. But, there's a trade-off there that your number could be even higher if you weren't contributing to women's basketball and baseball and things like that, whereas other schools probably aren't having to do much of that.
Right, not having to worry about that. Let me ask you this, when everybody goes here. Schools are now hiring former NFL executives to come in and run their thing like a GM. You haven't been a big proponent of, you're not against it, but there's a reason you're not really clamoring for a general manager at Tennessee. Explain why.
Well, I've said this. I think there's real value if the idea is going out and getting a former NFL guy, someone who's been in a front office, knows how to manage a salary cap, things like that. I think there's some real value in that.
Is it Reggie or Raleigh McKenzie that's the front office?
Reggie.
It'd be Reggie.
Yeah.
Let's just say, he's in his 60s at this point, so it wouldn't be the guy. But let's say you pulled him away from the NFL and said, we need somebody to come in here and straighten this up. Let's say it's Reggie McKenzie. The plus is you've got a guy who knows how to work in a front office.
Mm-hmm. And he's got a scouting background too. He'd have a little bit of both. And so, you've got that experience. But it's another voice in the room, if nothing else, that would add to the discussion. Because there's a lot of, I think people would be surprised by the different types of discussions that are had in college football programs about, is this guy a take? How much is he worth? All those kinds of things that come into play. And the evaluation is at the core of it, but that's not always the deciding factor in the end. There's all just sorts of layers to that now. But you have that, and to bring in a guy that manages a cap, there's some value in that. But if that doesn't change the structure of how your organization is run, is it really changing much? Is it really worth the title? So I think a lot of people think, okay, GM would come in and fix things. That would be great.
Right.
But if at the end of the day, Josh Heupel or whoever at the top of the organization is making that decision, is it worth going out and spending $600,000 or $800,000 a year on some guy, some hotshot from the NFL to basically run your organization when he's not getting to run your organization? Like, is Bill Belichick calling the shots at North Carolina, or is Michael Lombardi?
Belichick.
Yeah. So, and Belichick wanted control in the NFL. So that's how a lot of head coaches are going to be. So if it's not changing anything, is that position as important as people are making it out to be? I keep seeing, Jacoby Thomas goes in the portal, and I see people on social media saying, Tennessee needs a GM yesterday. This shouldn't be happening. Would a GM have stopped that? I mean, that's the other thing. Some of these guys are going in the portal because of the advice they're getting from family members, from coaches, from trainers. It's not because of anything the school's doing wrong in a lot of cases. It's just because people are having different ideas on what's out there, and they're listening to bad advice sometimes. Sometimes it's good advice. Sometimes it's an agent. It's a different situation, and each time doesn't mean a GM would have fixed any of that.
Well, I mean, I think you touched on the issue, and that is, if you went and got a pro guy in here to be your GM, is Josh Heupel going to listen to him? Is Josh Heupel going to let him be an equal on the org chart? Is he above Josh Heupel? That isn't going to happen. No head coach is going to say, the GM has final call here. The coach is still going to have – it's just it's like a tool for him to use, and it would depend on how much he would use it.
Right.
And one thing we've seen from Josh Heupel in terms of the offensive side of the ball, he doesn't tend to go outside often. It's a lot of promoting from within.
Would he want to bring in an NFL guy that he doesn't know, hasn't worked with before to do that? That's a very interesting discussion, especially on such an important position. I mean, what's more important these days than how you bring in talent, how much money you're willing to spend on certain players, things like that. That's a very important position. So to concede some power to a guy that you've never worked with in the past, that might not be something Josh Heupel would do. I don't know.
It's not just finding a capologist who just does the math where, hey, we got this kid and we want him for X. Work out the details.
Because at the end of the day, he might recommend, hey, don't spend this much on this guy.
Right.
And the head coach might say, but I really want that guy.
There you go. Yes. So that's not a fix-all to go get a GM.
Right.
Okay. And I want to get one last thing in here that has nothing to do with anything we talked about. It's just more craziness. The state of Arkansas last week apparently passed a deal that players in that state who get money for revenue sharing will not be taxed on it. It'll be tax exempt. You've already got the move is being made in this state to where anything they make is going to be kept quiet. They're trying to hide. And I'm sure every state's going to go down this road because that's a recruiting advantage.
Yep.
For all I know, Tennessee's already working on that to make it tax exempt.
Yeah.
I don't see how I don't know how that plays with boosters who are taxed.
Yeah.
I mean, you're giving an 18-year-old kid $1 million and he's not taxed on it, but I work a 40-hour week. And I am taxed on what I get. Nobody's just handing it to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to go over. Your thoughts on that little bit. But I guarantee you every state's going to do it because you want to be equal. You want your school, home state schools, to be equal with all the other schools out there. So this is what it's going to be, tax-free cash, and you don't know how much they're getting paid.
Well, will it get done everywhere? That's a fascinating aspect of it. You kind of touched on it there. There might be some pushback on to this in some states. So I don't know. We thought
Should be, in my opinion.
We've kind of seen some of this that we thought every state's going to do this, and the laws are still uneven on this across the country. So I don't know. It'll be done a lot of places probably. I'm sure we'll see some of that, some copycat.
Bet you it's done in the SEC states.
Yeah, you're probably right. But again, it shows you the motivation, the different ways everyone's trying to be creative to get some sort of advantage, because it's just so hard now that everybody has money. In Arkansas, you're doing your best to keep up with the teams at the top of the SEC, and you're already fighting geographical challenges and things like that to win at Arkansas. If you don't have as much money, you got to find some way to put yourself ahead. So, let's make it tax-free. So everyone's going to get creative and do what they can, but it just underscores the need for college football, whoever is running this sport, some sort of leadership to take charge and bring in some across-the-board rules that apply to everyone. Because as long as there's not the case, as that's not the case, state legislatures are going to have as much power as anyone to distinguish what a program can do compared to others.
Well, and so many people out there now saying, where's the NCAA in all this?
Yeah.
Well, you killed the NCAA.
Yeah.
You wanted your schools to sue the NCAA over everything. Everything the NCAA did that was against your school, Tennessee, Miami, USC, whatever. Sue them. Sue them. Sue them. Defang them.
And they want to get rid of the NCAA. Well, guess what? You would need a new one.
See, that's just it. They act like, get rid of that silly rule book.
Yeah.
You're going to have to write a whole new rule book.
The NCAA serves at the mercy of schools. They're there to help the schools.
Exactly. That's what's so a mess about it. And we've said this before on the television show, and I think it always needs to be underscored. The schools could end this right now.
Yeah.
They could go ahead and make these kids employees.
Mm-hmm.
And
which that's another big deal for the tax-exempt part. They're paying self-employment tax, essentially, because they're not employees. So they're having to take a lot of money out for taxes.
Well, they won't in Arkansas.
Yeah, so it actually saves them a good bit of money to do that.
But, I mean, that's one of the things that is going to be crazy about all this stuff, is that each little angle is its own deal, and the colleges could easily make them employees.
Yep.
And you'd have to share the TV revenue.
And that's the problem.
So it's not just sharing. When we say, well, it's going to be revenue sharing under the House settlement, one, I don't know how long that's going to last. I think it'll be sued into oblivion within 6 months. But let's say it sticks. Mm-hmm. It's still just sharing $20 million, let's say.
Yeah.
20 and a half is at the money.
And that would be across
20 and a half
all
across
sports.
All sports.
The SEC might come up with an across-the-board number that is allowed to apply to each sport. So football might get 13 or 15 million, and that number would be similar throughout your conference maybe, but each conference would have a different approach to that. So, but it wouldn't solve everything, to your point.
Yeah, it's just silly that we all talk about how there's no fix for this, and it is there.
Yeah.
If the colleges would share the TV revenue. It's not just if you make them employees, they're going to get more than $20 million.
Yep.
Whereas right now you're trying to, let's get the House settlement, let's get Congress to get involved, and Congress doesn't want to touch this.
But see, again, the problem is no one's looking out for the greater good of the sport.
They never have been.
No one cares about the fans, the fan enjoyment of the sport, the fact that the transfer portal is so infuriating to fans. If you wanted to solve it,
media people.
You want to keep players out of the portal, make them employees. You could have binding contracts that would prevent some of that. But as it's set up now, you can't do that. Now we'll see if Arkansas can recoup money and see if that's a way to enforce them.
Start it.
But otherwise, there's nothing you can do until you make them employees.
Ryan Callahan, always fun to get you in here and talk about this stuff. Even it helps me hate the stuff less, because it's at least giving some fun conversation.
Yeah.
But it is a maddening time in college football and college sports in general. Ryan Callahan, GoVols247.com. You can find his stuff there. He does great work. Thank you for watching. Be sure to click the like button and hit subscribe. You can leave a comment down below if you've got questions, or if you think we answered wrong. Well, if you think I answered wrong, he would have answered right. Any of that, leave it in the comments. Hit the bell. I think that notifies you. I'm trying to think of any other instructions I could give you. Thanks for helping us already. We'll see you next time on the Sports Source Digital Network.